There is a crisis running through modern parenting. It hides inside the best intentions, inside the carefully chosen schools, the structured enrichment programs, the trophies handed out simply for showing up. It hides inside the praise we give so freely that it has lost all meaning. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff saw this clearly. A child raised on constant praise and permanent protection does not become strong. He becomes dependent. He learns to perform for approval rather than act from character. And by the time he is an adult, the habit is so deeply embedded that he cannot separate who he is from the applause he receives. Gurdjieff saw it long before the modern world made it universal. He was not interested in producing well-behaved children who could recite answers. He was interested in something far more demanding, producing human beings who were awake to life, capable of navigating its real difficulties without collapsing, and grounded enough in themselves that the world's approval or disapproval could not dictate their inner state. What he taught about children was not sentimental, it was deeply humane. The first thing Gurdjieff understood, and this is where everything else begins, is that a child arrives in the world in a state of remarkable integrity. He called this the child's essence. It is the self before influence, before social conditioning, before the layers of learned behavior that accumulate year after year until a person can no longer tell the difference between who they genuinely are and who they were trained to become. Children are closer to essence than adults precisely because they have not yet been thoroughly covered over. Their reactions are real. Their curiosity is unsimulated. When a child is delighted, he is fully delighted. When he is afraid, the fear is genuine. He has not yet learned to perform his emotions for an audience. This is why Gurdjieff paid particular attention to the very young. He understood that the window for shaping a human being at the level of essence rather than merely at the surface of behavior is narrow, and once it closes, the work becomes immeasurably harder. As Kenneth Walker observed while watching Gurdjieff with children in Paris, Gurdjieff believed that very young people were of far greater importance than adults around him because they represented a generation that had not yet been shaped wrongly, and which, through right teaching and upbringing, might be saved. The phrase is worth pausing on, had not yet been ruined. It implies that the standard education of his time, and arguably of our time, was itself a form of damage. A slow diminishing of the child's innate wholeness under the pressure of social conformity, parental anxiety, and the relentless demand to perform. One of the most distinctive features of Gurdjieff's approach to children was his refusal to lecture them directly. He preferred what might be called indirect instruction, positioning an experience so that the child arrived at understanding through his own encounter with reality rather than through someone else's words about it. He called this beginning from afar. The reasoning is precise. When you tell a child something, you give him information. When you create a situation in which the child discovers something himself, you give him an experience. And experiences, unlike information, cannot be taken away. They become part of who the child is. Denis Saurat, reflecting on Gurdjieff's manner with children, noted that one does not tell children the whole truth all at once. One gives them carefully prepared portions of the truth that can further the development of their character, and sometimes one even creates stories to encourage children to arrive at understanding themselves. This patience, the willingness to set up the conditions for discovery rather than delivering the answer, runs against everything that modern parenting tends to do. We explain, we instruct, we correct in real time. We hand the child the conclusion before he has had the chance to feel the question. Gurdjieff understood that a lesson absorbed by a child's own effort stays. A lesson delivered from above tends to slide right off. He avoided sentimental precepts when teaching children. He preferred concrete, practical examples to abstract theory. He fit the example to the immediate context of the child's experience, so that the relevance was immediately felt rather than explained. This is the principle that most sharply divides Gurdjieff's approach from the dominant parenting philosophy of our time. He was direct about it. Never praise children. Before dismissing this as severity, it is worth understanding what he meant. He was not advocating coldness or indifference. He was identifying something that constant, unearned praise actually does to a developing human being. It creates an addiction. The child learns to work for the praise rather than for the work itself. The internal compass, which should be pointing toward genuine effort and real accomplishment, begins to point instead toward the approval of others. Gurdjieff saw this as a form of slavery. A child who can only function when praised is not free. He is perpetually dependent on an external source to validate his interior state. And as he grows older, this dependency doesn't diminish, it simply transfers. The praise of parents becomes the approval of friends, which becomes the validation of employers, which becomes the affirmation that social media can provide in endless, hollow supply. The child who was never taught to find his own standard of sufficiency becomes the adult who cannot. Gurdjieff's second principle for children was that hope of receiving reward should come only through genuine merit, effort, and achievement earned, not distributed automatically. There is a distinction between acknowledging real accomplishment and flooding a child with approval for simply existing or trying. One builds honest self-knowledge, the other builds a performance. What Gurdjieff offered instead of praise was something more valuable: genuine attention, a real challenge, and the satisfaction of having actually earned something. He would reward a child's sustained attention with something concrete, a sweet, a coin, a task completed and acknowledged, but always tied to something the child had genuinely done, not to the child's mere presence. Nothing illustrates Gurdjieff's method more vividly than the way he taught children about money. He did not sit them down and explain the value of currency. He did not give lectures on financial responsibility. He constructed situations in which children were required to navigate money in real time, with real stakes, and were left to draw their own conclusions from what they experienced. One afternoon, when young Michel de Salzmann asked for money to buy a treat, Gurdjieff heard the request and told the boy he could keep whatever he could add up. He began placing coins and then notes into the boy's open hand, starting slowly, then accelerating the pace until the cascade of money overwhelmed the child's capacity to track it. When Michel lost count, the game ended. What Gurdjieff gave him was not financial education in the conventional sense, but a living impression of what greed and fear feel like when they compete with attention, and that impression stayed with him for a lifetime. The lesson was not about money at all. It was about the interior battle that happens when desire and fear enter the mind simultaneously, and how attention is the only thing that can hold steady against them. Later, when the same boy won $280 at a shipboard casino at age 8, Gurdjieff's advice was equally precise. Rather than moralizing about gambling or simply confiscating the money, he explained the group's genuine financial difficulties to Michel and asked if he could help. Michel chose to give the money. He left the experience feeling large rather than guilty, having made a real contribution as a man, rather than being shamed as a child who had done something wrong. This is the essence of the method. The child is met as a participant in life, not as a problem to be managed. The lesson is embedded in reality, not delivered from above. Among Gurdjieff's 10 principles for raising a responsible human being, one stands out for the vividness of its image: fearlessness towards devils, snakes, and mice. He was not speaking literally, though he may well have meant literally as well. The snake is a metaphor for every force in the world that threatens to paralyze a person: danger, uncertainty, confrontation, failure, the unknown. A child who has been overprotected from difficulty does not learn to navigate these forces. He learns to avoid them. And avoidance, habitualized over the years, becomes a personality trait. It becomes the adult who cannot act decisively when something real is at stake. Gurdjieff specifically included fearlessness toward the irrational among his core principles for children, cultivating the ability to face the unknown with courage and rational clarity rather than retreating from it. The properly educated child, in Gurdjieff's view, does not freeze at the snake. He assesses it. He acts from genuine understanding rather than from conditioned panic. This capacity only develops through exposure, through being allowed to encounter difficulty without an adult immediately removing it. The parent who clears every obstacle from a child's path is not protecting him. He is preventing the child from ever developing the muscles that life will eventually demand. And life, unlike a well-meaning parent, will not adjust its demands to match an underdeveloped capacity. Gurdjieff was equally clear that a child must be prepared to live within a society, not to become a slave to its conventions, but to move through it with awareness and adaptability. He told children directly that they should not simply follow rules given by parents, identifying with the role their family wished them to play for the family's sake. He wanted them to develop their own standards, their own internal rules, rooted in genuine understanding rather than inherited habit. Yet simultaneously, he emphasized that children must respect those who genuinely guide them, not from fear in the fearful sense, but from a recognition that the relationship itself is a form of discipline. One of his core principles was a concern for grieving parents and teachers, not as an oppressive obedience, but as an awareness that maintaining the goodwill of those who matter to us is itself a moral practice, a form of attention paid to the fabric of human connection. He was precise about the difference between authentic respect and empty obedience. A child who obeys simply because he is afraid of punishment has learned nothing about why certain conduct is valuable. A child who respects a parent because he has observed the parent's wisdom, care, and consistency, that child is developing moral perception. Comportment at the table was particularly important to Gurdjieff, who compared the casual manners of Western children to the more intentional, almost ceremonial conduct of those raised in Eastern traditions. Sitting, eating, and speaking with others were not trivial social conventions. They were training in attention, in the capacity to be present with other human beings. Gurdjieff was firmly opposed to any form of education that produced adults who were dependent on others for their basic function in the world. His 10th principle was direct: strive early to earn one's own bread. The cultivation of independence and self-sufficiency was not optional, it was foundational. Without it, a person remains a burden, unable to contribute meaningfully to the life around them. He applied this practically. Children at his institute were involved in real work, not play work, not simulated tasks, but genuine labor that contributed to the functioning of the community. They learned that effort produces results, that the world does not sustain those who refuse to participate in its maintenance, and that there is a particular dignity available only to those who can genuinely take care of themselves. He assigned children specific tasks that required real initiative, sending them to find unusual foods in unfamiliar neighborhoods, asking them to exchange large bills at banks, and giving them the experience of navigating adult environments without adult supervision. The discomfort and occasional failure embedded in these tasks were the point, not a problem to be eliminated. He also taught children to distinguish between what they needed and what they wanted. He told them plainly, learn the difference between what you need and what you want, and then learn to want what you need instead of needing what you want. That reorientation from craving to sufficiency is the foundation of a genuinely stable interior life. His 7th principle was precisely this: the capacity to find joy in what one already has, rather than perpetual dissatisfaction with what one lacks. Underlying every specific practice was a single preoccupation: attention. Gurdjieff believed that the capacity to sustain directed, voluntary attention was the most valuable thing a human being could develop, and that this development must begin in childhood. Everything else, moral character, practical competence, resilience, is downstream of this one capacity. He devised specific exercises for children at his institute to develop it. One involved sending several children to the same spot for the same amount of time, then having them return and report what each had observed. The differences in their reports revealed how differently attention could function in different children, and Gurdjieff would ask each child why they had not seen what another had. To observe well requires both attention and memory. He admonished children who seemed distracted with a single phrase, "Pomni sebia," remember yourself. A child who learns to observe to actually register what is in front of him rather than drifting through experience on autopilot is developing something that no curriculum can directly teach. He is learning to be present, and presence, in Gurdjieff's understanding, is the precondition for everything that makes a human life meaningful. None of this is easy to implement. Gurdjieff's approach to children asks something demanding of the adults responsible for them. It asks the parent to resist the impulse to protect the child from every discomfort. It asks for the patience to create the conditions for discovery rather than simply delivering the answer. It asks the parent to distinguish between genuine praise, acknowledging real effort and real accomplishment, and the constant, reflexive affirmation that teaches a child his worth is determined by how others respond to him. It asks, above all, for the parent to be awake to the child in front of him, not managing a project, not following a parenting philosophy, not anxiously monitoring outcomes, but actually present with another human being in the earliest and most formative stage of his life. Gurdjieff himself modeled this. Those who observed him with children consistently noted that he gave them his complete attention. He was not performing interest. He was not going through pedagogical motions. He was genuinely present, and children registered that presence immediately and completely. They knew him, as he said, in the skin. That quality of presence, the capacity to be fully where you are, with whom you are, is perhaps the deepest thing a parent can offer a child. And it is, in the end, the very thing that Gurdjieff spent his entire life trying to restore in grown adults who had lost it. A child raised this way will not always be comfortable. He will encounter difficulty without having it removed. He will earn praise only when he has genuinely earned it. He will be asked to attend to the world around him with real care. He will be handed real responsibility while still young enough for it to shape his character rather than merely test it. From all the friction, effort, and unmediated encounter with life, he will develop something that no amount of protection and validation can produce. He will develop himself. That is what Gurdjieff was pointing toward, a child who becomes, over time, a human being of genuine substance, someone who can be trusted with difficulty, someone who can be trusted with freedom, someone who is, in the truest sense, awake